Hello, History 1 students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 13, Section 4, Populism. Number 1, populism was a movement to increase farmers' political power and to work for legislation in their interest. Farmers, for the most part, had been for many years trying to organize. On the lower part, left-hand corner of your screen here, there's some emblems of the Grange movement, which was an organization of people in agriculture. And this movement actually spanned the Midwest from really before 1900 well into the 20th century. There was also another group known as the Farmers Alliance. Again, it was an organization of farmers who were looking out for their needs. And eventually, they kind of pooled their resources together to form a political party known as the People's Party, or sometimes known as the Populist Party. So, in number 2, one specific problem that greatly concerned farmers was the nation's money supply. The money supply had been in question for many years, and when we get into talking about populism, one of the terms that you're probably going to hear about is called bimetallism. There was a belief that maybe our currency would be better off if it was backed by not just gold, but also silver as well. So, and number 3, to help finance the Union's war effort at the time of the Civil War, the United States issued millions of dollars in greenbacks, which could not be exchanged for either gold or silver coins. And number 4, the rapid increase in the money supply without an increase in goods for sale caused inflation, which is a decline in the value of money. Now, just so you understand, a lot of our farmers were kind of hoping for this idea that if money, for the most part, would be readily available, prices would go up, and meaning that their farm commodities, their livestock and their grain, perhaps cotton, would be worth far more in an inflated situation. Number 5, realizing that their problems were caused by a shortage of money, many farmers concluded that our eastern banks had pressured Congress into reducing the money supply. Hence, we get this feeling that, farmers are being taken advantage of by people in the big cities. And there kind of comes a little resistance from that. And number 6, some people, particularly those living in the West, wanted the government to mint silver coins. And part of that has to do with the fact that there were many silver mines in the West. The whole silver boom is kind of slowing down by the time we get to the 1890s. And by minting silver coin, there would be a demand for mining, so a demand for that labor, but it also would mean that we could inflate prices, and that would make your farmers happy. So needless to say, a lot of our miners and a lot of our farmers were united on these issues. And number 7, cooperatives pooled farmers' crops and held them off the market in order to force prices upwards. And this is really the whole principle when we talk about farmers' cooperatives even today, which obviously are not just small town things. It's actually big corporations that are running many of these. But the idea is that farmers working together, if they can hold their crops maybe in storage, can market them at a later date when there isn't as much corn or soybeans available, forcing the prices upward, meaning that they would make more money. In number 8, in Wabash versus Illinois, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states could not regulate railroads, meaning that a state can't tell a railroad what to do, or could they, for the most part, regulate commerce, meaning business that crossed their state lines. For the most part, this is something that either corporations, in this case with the railroads, are going to be managing. And when we talk about business crossing state lines, that's something that the federal government, not states, is going to have a say. Number 9, the exchanges, which are basically places where you can sell your goods and services, particularly when we talk about agricultural exchanges, that could be a farm commodity or the commodity exchange and such, had success with cotton prices in the state of Texas. and also with railroad rates in the state of Illinois, meaning that farmers in Illinois could, for the most part, work with the railroads to get a lower price for sending their goods to market. Number 10, a plan by Charles Mancune called for farmers to store their crops in government warehouses called sub-treasuries. Sub-treasuries, for the most part, are kind of like if we were talking about our cooperatives, basically they are very large warehouses, facilities, or in some cases, granaries, storage facilities where our farmers could store this for a long period of time, and then eventually at some point in time it could be sold again for a higher price. Number 11, populists who attended the Omaha Convention, meaning the Omaha Political Convention, called for federal ownership of railroads and a graduated income tax. Here in a moment, we're going to go through some of the big points of the Omaha platform, but this would be the platform for the Populist Party. And just so you know, the Populists had their convention in Omaha, Nebraska for really one reason. The main political candidate that was running was a Nebraskan. So both the Democrats and the Populists nominated a man from Lincoln, Nebraska named William Jennings Bryan for president in 1896. Bryan had given a series of speeches throughout the Midwest, going to lots of little towns, but he always talked about the fact that farmers were being crucified on a cross of gold. And as you can see in this little political cartoon, he has his crown of thorns and he has his cross of gold in his hands. So let's talk about the Omaha platform. These are some items that you do need to write down. So you're going to need to have a piece of scratch paper. So in the Omaha platform, the Populist Party is calling for the direct election of U.S. senators. This is something that we have currently as a result of the 17th Amendment. But in 1896, U.S. senators were not elected by the people. They were actually elected by members of state legislatures. And the concern is that if a state legislature was perhaps maybe tainted by big business and corporations, they would obviously select a U.S. senator that is going to support their claims and desires. So what they wanted to see is the people being able to vote. And that does happen, but it's going to happen after 1900. The abolition of the national bank, this idea of getting rid of a national bank, allowing local banks to kind of, for the most part, wheel and deal on their own, and hopefully allowing the market to kind of to set the prices of different things, the rate of interest and things like that within the bank itself. They also called for the graduated income tax. In 1896, we did not have an actual income tax on people in the United States. There was only a time that we had an income tax, and that was during this American Civil War. And an income tax is eventually going to come back to us in 1913. But at this point in time, there is no tax. And so what the graduated income tax would do is, if you are one of the wealthier people in our country, you would be taxed heavily. Okay. And so if you were poor, obviously you would not be taxed at all. The next one, government ownership of railroads, telephone, and telegraph systems. There was concern that there were monopolies and corruption going on with these different services. And if the government could own it and regulate it, they would be able to set the prices. Restriction of undesirable immigration. In 1896, we had kind of a lot of people coming into the United States, and many of them were coming from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And these were people that the populists did not like, and they wanted to stop that. They wanted an 8-hour workday. At this point in time, some of our unions are arguing for that, but most workers in the United States did not have an 8-hour day. Eventually, we're going to see that. And sometimes you can even blame it on part of the Great Depression for setting some of those hours. But what they wanted to do is to make sure that workers had a reasonable amount of time away from work. They wanted free silver, which is going back to this concept of coinage of silver, so that we could again inflate prices, helping farmers, helping the miners. They wanted an Australian ballot, which is also known as a secret ballot, which, by the way, that's what we have today. But at 1896, when you went into the polls to vote, you got different colored paper for the different parties that you belonged to. So if you were a Democrat, you got a yellow sheet. If you were a Republican, you got a green sheet. If you're an independent, maybe you got a different colored sheet. And so when you cast your ballot, everybody knew what party you were voting for. And then finally, a single term presidency for not only the president, but the vice president, rather than being elected for however long that person could be elected to. They wanted to set a limit. And eventually we are going to set a limit. We're going to pass a constitutional amendment, and it's basically going to say that a president would have 2 terms in office. But there wasn't that limit at this point in time, and nobody had really gone beyond 2 terms. That's only going to happen when we get into the 1930s and we talk about the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So, number 13, William McKinley's personal reputation helped improve the Republican Party's image. Just so you know, McKinley and our friend William Jennings Bryan were running against each other in 1896 for the presidency. And the image with the Republicans is an image of urban workers and immigrants, for the most part, helped the Republicans win this election. So in number 14, although the populace began to decline after 1896, some of the reforms they did favor did become, reality in decades to come. Okay. One last thought I want to leave you with is this man, L. Frank Baum. And eventually we're going to talk, when we go over our questions, about his literary work, The Wizard of Oz, and why that literary work might be an analogy of the Populist Party. Stay tuned to find out more.